Well, I want to thank all of you who've been patiently waiting in the waiting room for today's call with Pastor Rafael Cruz. We'll be bringing him up. He'll have the main portion of the Zoom call today. I know some of you are watching and others are listening, but my name is Rick Scarborough. I'm the National Pastor Advisor to the Jonathan Project. It's a privilege to come to you via this means every single week. I want to take just a moment for those who would be first-time callers and first-time participants, explain just a little bit about the Jonathan Project. A lot of people say, Pastor, Jonathan Project, what does that mean? In fact, that was one of the first questions I asked when I was invited to join the team. Why Jonathan Project? And the answer was a pleasure. Mr. Hershen, Peter Hershen, he and his brother started creating family-oriented entertainment venues about 3 decades ago. They own Silver Dollar City in Branson. They own Dollywood over in Pigeon Forge, to name a couple. They actually have theme parks in 10 states across the Southeast, and all of them are an outgrowth of their own heart to provide families with a place to go and not be confronted and have their morals challenged. A few years ago, Mr. Hershen got concerned, as many of us have, about the failure of Christians to be engaged in politics. And he began asking the question, why don't more preachers talk about it? Why don't Christians vote? Statistically, only half of those who name the name of Jesus are registered to vote. That's a pretty common and often used percentage, pretty commonly embraced and known. But here's the tricky part. In an election year, only about half, sometimes less than half, actually show up to vote. But in off-year elections, less than 10% show up to vote. That's why city councils and local school board elections are won by a handful of votes. Often one large church could sway an election in a local community if the people just showed up. There are a lot of excuses for people not voting. Mr. Hershen pulled together a wonderful Christian political, I like to call him, Nathan Adams, who is the CEO of our entire organization, committed Christian, has run national and statewide campaigns for years, is respected by all the elected officials that in the state of Missouri for his expertise, but is also known in the Christian community for his love for Christ. And so Mr. Hershen brought him into a meeting, 3 or 4 prominent preachers from Missouri. In fact, I was invited shortly thereafter to join that group as one of their first employees, a position that at the time I declined because my own organization was prospering and growing, and we were in transition phase to a successor to my ministry or to my leadership of the ministry. So I declined, but the outcome of that was the Jonathan Project, and was named that because, as Mr. Hershen said, I want this ministry to be as much a friend to the pastor as Jonathan was to David, the anointed one, and hence the Jonathan Project. Everything we do is absolutely free to the local church. We'll never ask you for a contribution. Our ministry will never solicit your people. We don't take a list of members and start asking them for donations. We have a stellar board of wealthy men who help underwrite this, joining the example of Mr. Peter Hershen, who himself is a very wealthy man. He's in his mid-80s, and he wants his life to count. He wants to make a difference. So the Jonathan Project was born. In the last 4 years, they have done remarkable work, and everything is provable by the metrics and the technology they employ. We want to come alongside and help you do that which perhaps you don't have the time to do, but you have the heart to do. Everything is free. We have Bible study materials that you can download and brand as your own, written and taken from some of the brightest minds on our Christian heritage and history. You can use those in your Bible study hour. We encourage that for about a month before the election. We will do everything. We simply want to be a servant of your church family and of you, Pastor. I joined the Jonathan Project because it was better than anything I ever had the funds to create. We were a successful ministry. Vision America We had a national brand, but I'm grateful that today I can be more successful in moving voters than ever in my entire ministry because of the kindness of the people who offered me the privilege of coming on board in January of this year. So with that as background, and we'll say more about that, I want to bring up our guest of the week. Every week we have one of these calls, one of our own, Mr. Rafael Cruz, the father of Senator Ted Cruz. And Rafael, I want you to take a few moments at the outset and just talk about how you got to America and the price you paid for the freedom you enjoy. Rafael, so good to have you here today.
Pastor Rick, it's so great to be with you. And, as you well know, I was born in Cuba, basically was raised under a very oppressive military dictatorship. And as a result of that, I found myself involved in a revolution as a teenager. And as a result of that, I was imprisoned and tortured. And as a matter of fact, on 3 different occasions, I should have been killed. But by the grace of God, that God that I did not know, but he knew me and had other purposes for me, I was able to leave Cuba legally on a student visa and come to the United States. Came to the University of Texas. That was the first university to accept me. That's how I became a Texan. And worked my way through the University of Texas while I worked at a restaurant, first as a dishwasher, then as a cook. But I'll tell you what, I have seen communism firsthand. I have seen what it is to live without liberty. I have seen pastors and priests in prison because of preaching the word of God. I have seen people have, including my parents, have their property, even their home confiscated. And so I know what an ungodly government and communism actually is equivalent to atheism, because the two go hand in hand. Because for communism to exist, government must become your God, so you must destroy the concept of God. But I was so grateful to have come to the home of the free. I mean, the home of the brave and the land of the free, the place that is the greatest freedom on the face of the earth. And that is not accidental. Even from the inception of America, America was a country dedicated to the Lord Jesus Christ. Those people that came from the Mayflower, committed Christian people in the Mayflower Compact, they began by stating the purpose of America for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. That was their stated purpose. And we saw it in that the first Great Awakening, which was, of course, started by pastors, was the spark that ignited the American Revolution. And it was pastors that were at the forefront of the American Revolution. And of course, that leads me to what Pastor Rick mentioned a few minutes ago, that 50% of the church is not registered to vote, and of the 50% that is registered, only half of them are voting. That means 3/4 of the church are not voting. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked beareth rule, people mourn. And I have come across many Christians that say, well, politics is a dirty business. I don't want any part of it. Well, if the people of principle, if the people of God are not voting, the only way to have it not be a dirty business is for us, the people of God, to become involved. And those who say, well, politics cannot legislate morality. That is not so. Politics legislates morality all the time. Let me give you 4 quick examples. 1962, prayer was removed from all schools in America. Some of us remember when we prayed in school. That became illegal in 1962. A year later, in 1963, the Bible was banned from all public schools. Most Americans do not know that the Bible was the principal textbook in all schools from kindergarten to graduate school for over 150 years. And then it was removed in 1963. The net result of those 2 decisions, removing prayer and removing Bible study from schools, Teen pregnancy skyrocketed after 1963, and so did violent crime. 10 years later, 9 unelected officials of the Supreme Court decided that a baby in the womb did not have that unalienable right to life from our Creator, and they legalized abortion. As of today, almost 62 million babies have been murdered by abortion in America. Proverbs chapter 6 talks about 7 things that God hates. One of those is hands that shed innocent blood.
Correct.
What blood could be more innocent than that of an unborn baby? And then on June 26 of 2015, that same Supreme Court decided that God got it wrong. In Genesis 1:27, God says, let us create man in our own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female created he them. And then in chapter 2, he says, for this reason shall a man leave his father and mother and cling to his own wife. But the Supreme Court decided that marriage could be anything you define it. Now, let me ask you the question, aren't those 4 decisions among many not legislating morality?
Correct.
The question is, whose morality are they going to legislate? We have a stewardship responsibility over America. We have been a great gift of living in the greatest country on the face of the earth, a country that God has used to share the gospel throughout the world and to bring the message of freedom and free enterprise throughout the world. But we have a stewardship responsibility over America, and we exercise that stewardship responsibility through our vote. If we look at Matthew 28:18, what's called the Great Commission, and I want to take a slightly different view of the Great Commission. Jesus said, all authority or all power has been in heaven and in earth has been given unto me. What are the next 3 words? Go ye therefore. In other words, Jesus is saying, because all authority has been given unto me, unto Jesus, therefore you go. That is a delegation of authority. Yeah. Jesus has delegated his authority to us to go in his name. And when we vote for a political candidate, we are delegating our authority to them to represent us in whatever position in public office they have. And it would be ludicrous for us to have someone represent us who does not represent our values.
Can I interject something? Let me interject something to illustrate what you're saying, and I want you to speak to this, Rafael. One of the reasons I came back from Washington, D.C. is because in 2018, for the first time in 25 years, I didn't speak out one time at any kind of gathering to encourage people to vote their values. I put another man in charge, and he never asked me to make a speech. But one of the races that I watched unfold was the race between your son and Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke, even his name, he's trying to peddle himself as Hispanic. Your son is truly Hispanic. Beto O'Rourke doesn't embrace our faith, doesn't embrace our values. He's pro-abortion all the way to full term, infanticide. On the other hand, your son holds all of our values. And I know your father, so you're going to be a little partisan here, but I've grown to love the outspoken commitment to our values that your son holds. And yet, because of the failure of the church to show up, this incumbent senator who stands for all of our values came within 1.6 percentage points of losing that position. And a man who holds none of our values almost stole it away. It illustrates, for anyone who's listening, how important the church is in maintaining morality and advancing righteousness for all the reasons that you've stated.
Well, you know, Rick, one of the things that has been such an inspiration to me was when you in your church in Pearland, upon seeing so much ungodliness and so much actual sexual promiscuity being promoted in a school assembly, you actually encouraged your church to go out there to vote. And within one election cycle, they took over the school board, They took over the city council, and they were able to change school policy, and that has been an inspiration to me all my
Praise the
life.
Lord.
And so
To God
you
be the
have
glory.
walked the walk, not just talk the talk. But that is an example of what can be done if the church, if the people of God get involved to vote for righteousness' sake.
Amen.
And so I want to encourage all the pastors that are listening to us, all the people that are listening to us. It behooves us to make sure that righteousness prevails. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And again, I have to quote again Proverbs 29:19. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked beareth rule, people mourn. But if the righteous are not voting, if the righteous are not even running for office, we are acquiescing our country for the ungodly to rule us, and it becomes our fault.
Rafael, you've been watching, as all of us have been watching, the riots, literally our major cities across America, and some minor cities for that matter, are being literally torn to the ground. It is obvious to anyone who pays attention that this isn't just happening. It's not a spontaneous outbreak of violence. The fact that they're delivering stacks of bricks to key locations, they're delivering explosives. They're starting now to actually shoot and maim our police officers across the country. Do you see in any way that this could be an effort right now to topple our government? Is this driven by communism and those beyond that who are anarchists and want no law and order? Speak to what you see happening on the streets of our city.
Well, first of all, let me say that the First Amendment of the Constitution gives us the right to peaceful assembly. Everyone who is demonstrating peacefully has a right to do so, and we need to honor that right. However, they do not have the right to riot or to destroy private property, and much less to take the life of innocent bystanders. And you're right, those peaceful protests have been hijacked by people that come from the outside with a different agenda to disrupt public trust and to try to move to change the message. And I'll tell you what, if you, I remember when I was a teenager, I read a book that at the time seemed like science fiction. It was called 1984 by George Orwell.
Yeah, remember it well.
And I'm sure, Rick, you also read it many, many years ago. And, it talked about all of these overreach of our and removal of our rights and just a society that is totally oppressed. There is a book that all these radicals have used as their guide. It's called Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky.
I've read it.
And one of the things he says is, don't waste a good crisis. So these radicals use whatever the crisis is to identify themselves first with the crisis and then manipulate it for their own interest. And that's unfortunately what has happened. Now, it was also originated by a horrible misjustice. When we look at the video of that policeman with a knee on the neck of George Floyd for 8 long minutes, that was obviously murder.
Yes.
And I am so glad that not only he was charged, but those other 3 policemen that watched this man basically squash the neck of this innocent man until he was dead, and they did nothing. And I'll
Rafael,
tell you what, that's what having. Go ahead.
One of our COOs, Corbin Castile, has an editorial right now in the Star Telegram of Fort Worth about the need for Christians to engage, and talks about the atrocity of how law enforcement abused its power in that case. I want to encourage all of you to simply Google Corbin Castile, Castille, and Fort Worth Star Telegram. I'm actually praying that a lot more papers pick it up, but it's an excellent piece, and we'll have that on our website for people to read as well. But I'm so glad you made that emphasis, Rafael, because, and let me also just piggyback a little bit and say here, it's interesting that you take, last week we talked to Matt Staver about the awful abuse of power taking place with the governor and the mayor in Chicago and Illinois. Romanian Christians who migrated to this country for religious freedom built a church that runs about 2,000, but they have been forbidden to worship, denying their First Amendment rights. When they defied that unlawful order, they were then threatened with the demolition of their church building. And that would have happened had Matt Staver not secured an injunction, confronted them with the illegality of the governmental action. In the 11th hour, they pulled back and didn't actually pull that off. Here's the point. The same governor gets on television every night and says, you have a right, in the First Amendment, you have a right to petition your government. You have a right to assemble and protest. Again and again, he's talking about that First Amendment right. The same amendment that gives the Christians the right to gather to worship. So Amen. Here you have thousands in the streets, shoulder to shoulder, expressing their political view, which I commend. But he will not even acknowledge the church would have the wisdom to space 6 feet apart in a church building and worship God. There is something strangely wrong, but it also tells all of us what happens when people who are pro-abortion, anti-marriage, embrace these wicked philosophies, what they'll do when they get in power. And if they hold all 3 levers of power, our nation will be run like some of these cities that are run by leftist leaders. So just your thoughts on those thoughts.
Well, I think this overemphasizes again the awesome responsibility we have to make sure that righteousness prevails. And, I have mentioned it in the past in my Facebook Live broadcast. They're politicians that think that we work for them, but the Constitution is very clear. The first 3 words on the Constitution are "we the people." As a matter of fact, those politicians work for us. We the people are the actual rulers of America. We hired them through the vote, and we can also fire them through the vote. So that means we have a stewardship responsibility to make sure that we elect righteous men and women, people that uphold the Judeo-Christian principles upon which America has been founded. And who better to do that than the church? It is imperative that everyone in every church in America is registered to vote, and then they vote, and they vote for men and women that uphold those biblical principles that have made America the greatest country on the face of the earth.
Rafael,
I lost my freedom once, Rick, and I have told my son, Ted, when I lost my freedom in Cuba, I had a place to come to. If we lose our freedoms here, where are we going to go? And there is no place to go.
Rafael,
so we must fight to preserve our freedom, and the best way to do that is through the voting booth.
We're down to about 8 minutes, and I don't want to miss this. Rafael, you're in demand as much as any preacher in America. You can speak every week, several times a week. Why did you give your life and your testimony and your services to the Jonathan Project? What it is about the Jonathan Project that was attractive to you?
Well, let me say this, Rick. Over 10 years ago, the Lord gave me a very clear mandate through Ezekiel 3:17, which says, "Son of man, I call you as a watchman in the wall to do 2 things. To hear from me, that is to hear from God, and number 2, to warn the people." And God gave me a mandate, and it was, go tell my pastors to warn my people. And so I have a real burden for America, and I know that the solution for America is in the church. And I am just so encouraged when I see pastors that get this understanding that they have a responsibility to be salt and light in every area of society, and that includes government. We should be salt and light in education, in the media, in sports, in business, in government. And so if we vote for those who uphold the biblical principles, we will have again that shining city on a hill to the glory of God. And I've been involved in voter registration ever since 1980, when I was involved with the Religious Roundtable, along with D. James Kennedy and Jerry Falwell Sr. and James Robinson and Eddie McAteer, in trying to mobilize Christians to vote in 1980. And so I know what can happen if the Christians get involved. And I've never seen such a brilliant concept of voter registration. Not a table in the lobby of a church, that doesn't work.
Right.
You put a voter registration table in the lobby of the church and maybe 3 or 4 people will register. No, the Jonathan Project has taken to a new level to have people register their peers. People in the church, Sunday school leader teaching, helping everybody in their Sunday school to register. And so by working peer to peer, by talking to people that have confidence in you, we can get a great majority of the church involved. And I'm just so excited that the Jonathan Project has been able to get the funding by wealthy people that have a concern for America, committed Christian people, so that the church does not have any financial burden in having the Jonathan Project come and help them from the background without taking any accolades for themselves, but empower the people in the church to register their peers. It is a brilliant concept, and one that if enough churches across America do it, we will see America's best days ahead.
If they want to have you come and speak to their church, they can go to our website and make that request, but how can they reach you directly, Rafael? Give them your web address.
Well, you can go to graceforamerica@gmail.com, Grace, F-O-R, America@gmail.com, and that will go directly to my office.
Wonderful. Listen, folks, we've got to wrap this up. If you have a question for us, you can leave that in the chat room and someone will get back to you. You can email me directly. Here's my email address, rs, as in Rick Scarborough, @jonathanproject.org. If you have an interest in knowing more about how we operate and what we do a weekly Zoom call every single Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you would like to be a part of that Zoom call where we discuss how we can help your church, simply respond. You can write to me personally, rs at jonathanproject.org. You can go to our website and there's a place to leave information, and someone, we monitor that daily. Someone will be in touch with you within 24 hours. We're here to serve you. Rafael, as I expected, this has been an outstanding exchange. And let me just finally say to all of you, you hear any speaker like Rafael or last week Matt Staver, and was something just quickens your heart. You want others to hear that. Within 24 hours, you can link on our website, and here's the website, and listen carefully here, jptexas.org. J as in Jonathan, P as in Project, Texas.org. Go under resources, and you'll see links to all of our past Zoom calls, but you can link your friends and get this message out for us. There are always dozens of people who follow through and listen to these Zoomcasts after we air them live. Thank you so much for taking time. Rafael, you are a blessing, an inspiration to me. God bless you. We love you. See you next time.